I live in a more remote rural area, not a countryside without a signal, but a place that still has orchards, roosters crowing at dawn, and children throwing stones at birds, unfortunately. I have a reasonable cornfield in my backyard, something my grandfather started decades ago, and which I've continued more out of honor than money. And like any self-respecting cornfield, there was our faithful straw squire, an ugly scarecrow with a torn hat and a plaid shirt that has already survived 3 municipal elections. That scarecrow was almost a member of the family, even more useful than my ex-husband. Everything was peaceful until a new neighbor showed up. She was blonde, wide-eyed, and had a fake smile that was scary. The woman had that look of someone who lives to make a complaint. You know, that "I want to talk to your manager" energy, only in a field version. She had moved to a plot of land nearby with the aim of escaping the madness of the city and reconnecting with nature. Little did she know that nature here involves chicken poop, spiders the size of a child, and scarecrows. Lots of scarecrows. At first, I tried to be cordial. I knocked on the door with a homemade blackberry jam, welcomed her in, told her about the snakes in the area. Everything went to plan. But it wasn't until she stepped on the clay that the peace ended. The woman picked on everything: the smell of manure, the neighbor's rooster, the weeds on the ground, and, amazingly, my scarecrow. Yes, the scarecrow. She said it scared the children, that it had a very aggressive energy, and that it gave her 5-year-old daughter nightmares. But here's the thing. No one has ever seen this child. I even thought it was imaginary, because the woman spoke of her daughter as if she were describing an angel who floats instead of walking. She's sensitive. She has gifts. She sees things. What she really saw was problems where there weren't any. And you think she stopped there? Of course not. One Sunday morning, at 7 a.m., I wake up to the sound of cars, footsteps, and hysterical laughter. When I look out of the window, there she is, with 2 other women dressed in white. I swear, it looked like a cult, removing my scarecrow from the middle of the cornfield as if they were rescuing a saint from the middle of a macabre ritual. I flew down, barefoot and with my hair looking like a bird's nest, ready to smash a broom on someone's back. I asked her what the hell was going on, and she calmly let me go. We're saving this soul from suffering. This isn't just straw and cloth. It's an energetic representation of child oppression. We can't allow it to remain there. At that point I laughed. I couldn't hold it in. I thought it was a prank, that the woman was delirious because of some mushroom tea. But then came the worst part. She took the scarecrow to her backyard, set up a kind of altar, and started posting on social media as if she had done a social action of spiritual protection for the children of the community, with photos, with captions, with hashtags like "Salvando Infancias" and "Libertemos Espantalhos." I'm not kidding. The story went viral on a Facebook group of mothers, became a topic on a local radio station, and even a journalist showed up wanting to know about this spiritual rescue action. And what did I become? The villain. The evil woman who exposed children to a symbol of fear and psychological torture. According to a post she herself made with a selfie next to my scarecrow, now all decorated with colored ribbons and lavender scent. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was my scarecrow. It was my grandfather's. It was in my cornfield. And now it was serving as decoration for a makeshift shrine in the backyard of a lunatic who clearly mixed self-help with mild schizophrenia. That's when I decided that this clowning around, literally, was going to end. I was going to get the scarecrow back. And if I had to face the mother of the sensitive, the army of WhatsApp mothers, and even the Pope if he was on her side, then so be it. But little did I know that the worst was yet to come. The other day, while I was still trying to digest the absurdity of what had happened, I received a notification on my cell phone. It was a video of the woman, with my scarecrow behind her, with some mellow instrumental music in the background, speaking as if she were giving a speech at the Oscars. Today, we have freed an entity imprisoned by ignorance. How many more children will have to suffer before we understand the energetic impact of the images we put into the world? And there I was, in my torn pajamas, with the crumpled face of someone who just wanted to drink coffee and pretend it wasn't real. But it was. The worst thing was people's reaction. There were neighbors who shared it with little hearts, people who came up to me in the bakery with that passive-aggressive tone. "Wow, did you really keep that horrible doll in the cornfield?" The children cried just looking at it, you know. And all I could think was, my God, has it become a public health issue now? How far has humanity come? I tried to solve it by talking. I knocked on her door the next day, still trying to maintain an education that, honestly, I no longer had. I told her that I wanted my Scarecrow back, that this was trespassing and misappropriation, that she couldn't just walk onto other people's land and take their stuff like it was a donation from the town hall. She replied with a cynical smile, holding a cup of tea, that the Scarecrow now belonged to the community, that I should be proud to be contributing to a bigger movement. A bigger movement, people? I swear, if I'd had a brick in my hand right then. I went home snorting, my eyes on fire, thinking about the options. The first thing that came to mind was to report it to the police. But would anyone take me seriously? "Hi, I want to file a report because a woman stole my Scarecrow and is using it as a spirit guide to protect imaginary children." I was ashamed of myself just thinking about it. The second option was to break in and take it back. But then I'd be a criminal, and she'd love that. I must have had my speech ready. The oppressor is back. She doesn't want the children to feel safe. Third option? Prosecution. But that takes time, paperwork, and patience, which I was beginning to lose in huge doses. Meanwhile, the woman continued to play the role of martyr. She created an event in the neighborhood square, Energy Healing Circle with the Guardian of Childhood, a fancy name for my Scarecrow on a market stool with incense burning around it. She called people from outside, posted about it on her stories, and even put a banner in front of her house with the words, "We transform fear into love." Scarecrow is not a symbol of terror, it's a channel of light. And I was the forest witch who traumatized children with a straw doll. That's because the doll didn't even have a face. It was a burlap sack with 2 buttons sewn on. But it became the villain of the day. I became the villain. All this in the space of 3 days. The last straw was when I received a letter, a yellowed printed piece of paper with the signature of the Residents Association, which isn't even official, by the way, notifying me of symbolic disturbance in urban space and suggesting that I participate in a dialogue circle to better understand the psychological impacts of agricultural icons in residential environments. My God in heaven, I just wanted to plant corn. Now I had to defend the right to use a Scarecrow in a field? Since when did that become an emotional debate? So I decided to start recording everything. I filmed the removal of the Scarecrow. I got it from the security cameras, thank God. I saved prints of her posts, the videos, the comments where she clearly said that the Scarecrow was an imprisoned soul. And I started looking for a lawyer. I found one who, on the phone, let out a "one more of those," and I realized that maybe my story wasn't as absurd as I thought. The lawyer explained to me that this kind of thing, misappropriation, public exposure without authorization, use of the image of a personal object, could be prosecuted, and depending on the repercussions, even moral damages. I got excited. Not for revenge, but because it was starting to become a small-town joke. And that, my friends, hurts the ego like few other things. But in the meantime, the woman didn't stop. The following week, she set up a workshop to build new conscious scarecrows, where children used recyclable materials and received a final energetic blessing to make sure they didn't have oppressive traits. I saw a boy sticking glitter on a pet bottle and calling it a defender of the countryside. I swear to God, it was surreal. but it became fashionable, and that's when she felt untouchable. She started saying that the Scarecrow was the heritage of the new generation, that it was under community protection, that I should be grateful that it had finally found its mission in the world. What's worse, she started selling T-shirts with my Scarecrow on them. T-shirt for a profit. I saw it on her Instagram. $49 a piece. Dress for the cause, the caption read. That's when my lawyer called me and said, "Now we have a beautiful case on our hands." And I took a deep breath, because now she was going to dance. I never thought that one day in my life I would utter the phrase, "I filed a lawsuit because of a scarecrow." But hey, that's what you get for trusting other people's common sense. Because deep down, I thought this woman would realize the absurdity of what she was doing. Apologize, return the straw doll, and move on to the next sham social cause. But no, she was determined to continue her spiritual crusade to save the world from a doll with a plaid shirt and straw around its neck. The lawyer I hired, who, by the way, became almost my therapist throughout the process, filed the lawsuit for misappropriation of personal property, unauthorized use of an image, moral damages, and even illicit enrichment because of the damn T-shirts. We've attached prints, videos, a fake receipt for a community donation, and even a witness who saw her carrying the Scarecrow in her trunk, as if it were an emergency rescue for a traumatized plush. And what did this woman do when she received the court notice? She went online, of course. She recorded a video of herself crying in the middle of her garden with that crude Scarecrow on her lap, as if she were at a rural wake. She said she was being persecuted, that they were trying to silence a voice that only wanted to protect childhood. She hugged the Scarecrow as if it were her son. She kissed its cheek and thanked the universe for having been chosen to be a channel of healing. I swear, I had to watch the video in parts because I couldn't watch it all at once without feeling shame in my bones. The commotion was so great that there was even a protest outside my house. 4 people, 3 placards, and a child who was clearly only there because his mother promised ice cream later. One of the placards said, "Free the Scarecrow," and I stared at it thinking, where did my life take such an absurd turn? The lawyer told me not to answer anything publicly, that it was all part of her theatrics to try to manipulate the narrative. But do you think she stopped? Not at all. The woman doubled down. She started live streaming with holistic therapists, set up an online fundraiser for the legal costs of symbolic resistance, and even organized a themed festival in her backyard with workshops like vibrational healing through hay. I'm not making this up. There was even an intuitive dance workshop around the Scarecrow. And guess who was the master of ceremonies? A guy who introduced himself as the shaman of the Corn Belt. I looked at that and thought, either I've been asleep for weeks, and this is a very well-scripted nightmare, or the world really has gone mad. Meanwhile, the process continued. My lawyer asked for an expert opinion on the doll. Yes, a court expert had to go to her house to examine a straw Scarecrow to confirm that it was the same as the one in the camera images and in my old photos. The man was there, wearing gloves and a mask, making notes in a notebook as if he were evaluating evidence of a crime. I was embarrassed even for him. The woman, of course, tried to stop him. She said that the Scarecrow had already undergone an energy transmutation process, and that it was no longer the same object, that it now had a soul, that it was alive. The expert looked at her like he wanted to resign right then and there, but the report came out. It was the same Scarecrow, the same doll that my grandfather had made with his crooked hands, full of patches and torn jeans that he wore to work. When this confirmation came, it was as if a huge plug had fallen in. That woman really believed everything she said, or she pretended very well. What's worse, some people believed it too. I started receiving messages on Instagram from people calling me a symbolic aggressor, disconnected from the sacred, And one woman, astonishingly, sent me an audio saying that my stance was bad for the energy field of the region's crops. I nearly choked on my coffee listening to that. But there was also the other side. People who began to see the ridiculousness of the situation and finally opened their eyes. A neighbor, who at first thought what she was doing was cute, came up to me to apologize for reposting the video of the liberation of the Scarecrow. She said she had thought it was cute at first, but then realized it was just a mixture of self-centeredness and a need for applause. And that's exactly it. She didn't want to help anyone. She wanted the stage. When the day came for the hearing, I thought she was going to back out, that she was going to fake a faint, an outburst, anything to avoid facing the judge. But no, the woman went with the Scarecrow in her arms. That's right. She took him to court, sat on the bench with him on her lap, as if he were a baby. I wanted to laugh and throw up at the same time. And the judge? He stared at it with a, "What am I doing with my career?" look on his face. The hearing was a show of absurdities. She tried to defend herself by saying that she didn't steal, that she rescued, that the doll was crying out for vibrational help, and that she only followed a call. We showed all the videos, the prints, the testimonies, even the T-shirt being sold on an e-commerce site. And when the judge asked her if she thought she had the right to profit from something that wasn't hers, she replied, "It wasn't his. It was the universe's." It was at that moment that the judge sighed deeply, straightened his glasses, and looked at me with that look that says, "You win." After the hearing, it seemed that everyone came out of the collective trance they had been in. Even the most fanatical ones backed off, as if they had realized that maybe, just maybe, hugging a scarecrow in court and saying it had a soul wasn't exactly a sign of sanity. But the damage had already been done. Her name became a joke. There was a WhatsApp group with a picture of the Scarecrow holding a sign, "Give me back my corn." The internet is unforgiving, isn't it? But for her, it was all fuel. The more shame she was put through, the more she spoke of spiritual persecution, carnal judgment against the sacred, and other words that, frankly, only made sense to her and the half-dozen lunatic followers who still sent messages like "Strength, warrior of the light." There was even a guy who showed up claiming to be the cosmic guardian of the Scarecrow and asked to be heard as a witness. The judge didn't even blink. He just said no with a gesture and went back to writing something down, probably the request for early retirement. The sentence came out quickly. I was surprised. It seemed that the legal system itself was in a hurry to get rid of this circus. The woman was ordered to pay me a hefty compensation, and I mean hefty. As well as returning the Scarecrow, she had to pay the profits made from the T-shirts, pay for moral damages, and was also banned from using any image, name, or reference to the Scarecrow in any future content. In other words, end of the spree. And that's when the real world knocked on her door. Because, until then, she had been living off an inflated ego and internet applause. But the bill came, and the bill came heavy. When she saw the amount of compensation, she looked like she'd been slapped with rotten fish. She said she couldn't afford it, that she was a simple woman who lived off donations and sunlight. I almost asked if the sun would accept being seized. She tried to appeal. Of course she tried, but it was no use. The judge was clear. The evidence was incontestable, and justice was not going to give the stage to yet another mystical performance. And then the crying began. She made a video saying that she was going to lose her house, that earthly justice was corrupt, that she was being punished for spreading love. She said she was being crucified like so many others before her, at which point I almost called my lawyer to ask her to include Jesus in the case, because the comparison bordered on criminal. Rumors began to spread that she was going to make a ceremonial removal of the Scarecrow, that she was going to give it back as if it were an offering to the universe. I was already afraid that she was going to throw the doll in the river and say that it had been called by the waters. But no, one Sunday morning, with 2 witnesses and my lawyer present, she showed up at my gate. She was pale, wearing a white robe, barefoot, carrying the Scarecrow as if it were a loved one, going to be cremated. She handed it into my lawyer's hands with a short speech about letting go of what no longer belongs to your journey. I picked up the Scarecrow, looked at that dirty piece of cloth, now smelling of incense and glitter stuck to its chest, and took a deep breath. The doll was back, but peace? That was still a long way off, because even after all that, even after the public humiliation, the trial, the conviction, the debt, the woman carried on. She stopped talking about the Scarecrow, it's true, but she replaced it with other causes. She started selling air fresheners for emotionally colonized environments, organized a retreat to reconnect with urban-rural ancestry, and launched an online course in vibrational literacy through vegetables. Yes, there is such a thing, or at least she thinks it does. Me? I'm back to my routine. The cornfield is standing firm. The Scarecrow is there again, in its place, only now with a little sign on the side saying, "Private property. Do not touch. Do not bless. Do not steal." The neighbors stopped staring. Some even apologized, and I accepted it, because after all, everyone has their moments of falling for a lunatic. But I learned one thing. Never underestimate the destructive power of a person with too much free time, internet access, and zero sense of boundaries. Because this story could have ended with an apology, a simple refund, and a peace tea. But it didn't. There was a stage, there was a scandal, there was even a judge holding back laughter, all because of a Scarecrow. A Scarecrow that, if it really had a soul, would surely be laughing in our faces. And rightly so. The end? Maybe. But I still look away when I hear any noise coming from her yard. Because now she might decide that my mango tree represents the patriarchy and needs to be freed too. I don't doubt anything else. Nothing at all. And don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments, and until the next video,